Hello everyone, I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University, and we are now in week 7 of Exercise Physiology for Sport, Advanced Exercise Physiology, talking this week about the effects of training on VO2 max, performance and strength with cardiorespiratory and fitness testing, and of course going over some of the information we've covered in the past few weeks as we are now closing into the final half, moderately into the final half of our class. That said, starting first and foremost with some concepts from last week and previous weeks. Warming up in extreme temperatures. We should now know that to warm up in an extreme temperature, duration, work period-wise, should be about 3 to 5 minutes. If you go longer than that, you risk fatiguing your athlete prior to engaging in high-intensity exertion, which needs to be at least 90% to 95, 100% all-out efforts for something that's really 10 seconds or less when we're talking about someone who's a sprinter. Right? We're talking about someone who's more of a moderate duration type activity athlete. Well, we still want to keep that work period short because we want to make sure that they don't get fatigued for the same reasons, let alone an endurance athlete. Now, some situations with endurance type athletes, well, you may want to see that warm-up period go longer, but for the same reasons, we don't want to see them get fatigued. We've got to be careful. So we're looking at, generally speaking, a 3 to 5 minute warm-up period, which is true in general of a explosive power type training day, and certainly true for most athletes in most situations when we're talking about extreme situations of heat. What's extreme? Well, we're generally talking about those temperatures getting in the high 90s and above, or really 80s and above, all depending on the person and their adaptation to heat. Keeping in mind that, once again, if you want to get someone adapted to such situations where it's extremely hot or extremely humid, they need to be practicing and performing consistently every day in an environment that's similar to that for 7 to 14 days. If they don't do that, that's okay. Life goes on. We can't have perfection, but that's really the ideal time frame we found from research for getting the best performances following such adaptations. So that's the goal, okay? And performing similarly to our performance conditions. You can't do it every day. You're not going to perform at high-level all-out sprints or all-out interval-type work or whatnot, or agility work every single day, but we certainly want the person performing, our athletes performing in those temperatures for many days in a row so they get used to it. Still going with the idea of low to moderate to high intensity variations, all depending on their performance. It all comes back to, are they performing that we're supposed to be, we're supposed to be performing or not? If they're not, we have to lower the intensity. We have to increase the rest. You need to make sure you absolutely understand that very important concept, despite what every coach that we didn't do well with may have taught us in the past, or physical education instructors. I kind of remember the ones that did know what they were doing. They realized, hey, if they're getting worse, we got to actually alter that work period, maybe going lesser, maybe alter that rest period, maybe going longer, maybe going less intensity, whatever it takes to make sure we get the right level of adaptation for whatever performance we're aiming for, whether it's this Friday or Friday 20 weeks to come or next year or whatever it might be. Intensity-wise, max heart rate, percentage-wise. Now, you do your first interval or sprint or whatnot. The very first interval you do is not going to probably be anywhere near your max heart rate. It shouldn't be. If your first interval is already near your max heart rate, you got something to tell you. Performance is going to be awful today. Okay, it should not be that high already. We're talking about as the performance goes on. That's as high as it's going to be getting. Because I'll tell you, if you ever had anybody who gets the heart rate up or near their maximal heart rate, they have 1 or 2 sets left in them, and that's it. They might push it, they might collapse across the line and maybe give you 2 or 3 really good ones. But it's highly unlikely, and you're also going to hinder performance for many days to come because you pushed for extra 1 or 2 intervals, because you've already pushed them well past fatigue. And kudos to them for pushing through and getting the job done and doing what they had to do to meet your level of expectation, or whatever you had to do to meet the expectations of your coaches. That's not physiologically the way to get someone to adapt. Improving toughness? Yes. Actually, improving performance? No. Okay? That said, max heart rate intensity, depending upon what that max heart rate expectation is, of course, that's going to vary our other factors as well. But generally speaking, we want to make sure our warming up, we're starting somewhere probably in that 20%-ish max heart rate. That's like you walk onto the track, you walk onto the court, you walk onto the field. Your heart rate's pretty low relative to what it normally is. And getting it up to the level of expectation for whatever comes next in the practice session or in the game. Got to make sure that heart rate is up near what the expectation would need for it to be at that point of time when you need to start the game or start practice, right? That's the goal. RPE probably starts around 2, 3, 4, right? Moving up to 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever it needs to be for the level of practice. But it has to start low and gradually improve, just gradually increase the levels of expectation during practice or game at the end of your warm-up. VO2 max is not going to be a factor at all, to make this clear, for our sprint athletes, our explosive all-out type athletes that always have very long breaks between exertion levels. We're not worried about VO2 max at all. To be clear though, there are not many athletes in that category. A thrower in track and field, yeah, they fit in that category. A jumper, yep, in track and field does fit that category. Between every single individual little moment where they go and vault over the top of the vault over the bar, or attempt to vault over the bar, or jump over the bar, or jump into the pit, or something like it. There's one effort and you get a long break between. VO2 max doesn't matter for you. Football players, volleyball players, yes, VO2 max matters, because there are times, even though it's unusual, where you're on the court or on the field, and other sports similar to these two particular sports, where even though you think that they're more explosive type sports because, you know, they have a particular point that may only, or a play, may only go for a few seconds and there's a fairly long break between. That's not always the case. Some teams push hard and immediately go after a break as fast as possible, trying to fatigue the other team. And that happens, you better believe your athletes better be well conditioned, have a high level VO2 max, meaning they've aerobically conditioned at least to some degree. Now we're talking about warming up for those type of days. Well, that warm-up period for extreme temperatures is still going to be short, but we've got to gradually get up to their VO2 max, which is something that an athlete can perform for up to 10 to 12 minutes at their highest speed at that 10 to 12 minute time frame. That is what their VO2 max is, whether we're talking about a swimmer, a cyclist, or a runner, okay? Make sure it's really clear. It's also why we throw out VO2 max when we talk about speed and explosive work, because your percentage effort, if you can run a 6-minute mile, and so therefore in 12 minutes you can run 2 miles, well, you're clearly at your top sprint speed going to run a whole lot faster than 90-second laps around a track, right? So consequently, we're talking about VO2 max being, what, 200+% of VO2 max? Just inconsequential at that point in time. We're talking about interval type work and distance type work, endurance type work. VO2 max is inconsequential for explosive type work. Okay, percent max force output, well, whatever the goal was for today, make sure your warm-up gradually builds that person from level, 20, 30, 40% max force output, probably 20%, 10% from walking into the door to the gym or onto the field, whatnot, and building you up that 70, 80, 90%, whatever you're going to need for force development as it goes into the performance for the game or practice. I've harped on a lot of you when you say intensity. I'm always asking you, which one are you talking about? You're talking about percent max heart rate, or RPE, or VO2 max, or percent max force output. You cannot just say high intensity, moderate intensity, low intensity, because like I said before, you need to know this by now. This needs to be happening for you. It needs to pop in your brain right off the bat. You need to make it clear in your posts and make sure you're doing it with your athletes, the most important part of all of it, right? Not how you do it in this class, it's what you do with your athletes in the days and weeks and years following from here. But RPE is one thing, their perception of effort. They can have a high perception of effort, doesn't mean they're performing at a high level. Likewise, they can have a low perception of effort, but performing at a high level. That can happen. Max heart rate. Your heart rate can be really high. You're nervous, you're stressed, you're tired, you're worn down, you didn't drink enough water, you didn't eat well. Who knows? Something going wrong, you're sick, right? Something internally going on we don't even know about. Your heart rate will be higher. It doesn't mean you're performing at a high level. It has nothing to do with it. It's really important you get this. I don't want to see this in any more of any of your posts talking about getting the heart rate up or the goal is to get the heart rate up. It's never the goal. It may happen, and it's okay if it does, as long as performance is at a high level and we're meeting all expectations of however many sets we're going to do or however long we're going to go, and we're meeting performance standards all on the way. And hey, if they can do that, heart rate's probably reasonable for that particular person if they can do that. However, they have to keep doing it not just today, but every set, every day we have with them the next several weeks or months. So if you find one day they did great, the next 3 days they're awful, you probably pushed them too much this day. You're too high of a heart rate for that person. They're working too hard, despite the fact they met your performance standard on Monday. They're not meeting it Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That's not good. You're pushing them too much. That's what we need to be using with a max heart rate, is recognition of percentage-wise where they're seeing performance decline. Don't push past that point, okay? Cooling down is the opposite, right? For extreme temperatures, we're talking about that 3 to 5 minutes. Normally, our warm-up period is probably 10 to 15 minutes is the most common number you'll see. 5 minutes is possible in some situations where we're talking about explosive athletes, but more likely 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And in fairness, It's nothing wrong with going longer than that, as long as you're sure you're not fatiguing your athletes when you go longer in your warm-up and your cool-down. If you can be sure of that, if you're gradually getting them ready and you're not fatiguing them and wearing them out by just spending way too much time doing this whole warming up or cooling down thing, then we're fine. Okay, go longer. But generally speaking, during extreme situations, of course, also again, 5 minutes probably tops for the cooling down, give or take. If extreme cold, right, or extreme heat intensity, it was percent max heart rate, somewhere in that 70, 80, 90 plus percent max heart rate, whatever it might be, and trying to get it down to that, ideally 50% or less max heart rate, theoretically, would be ideal. Okay, RPE, get it down to level 4 or 5 RPE by the time they finish and walk for the locker room or walk for their cars or get off the field. Make sure the RPE is quite low. They're feeling good. No one's walking away, breathing hard, sweating profusely. Now, maybe they're sweating profusely several minutes ago, and they're still sweating some because they're still working, but no one should look beat up and tired. If your athletes are leaving the field, leaving the court, leaving the game situation or practice situation looking like they got the heck beat out of them, I don't know what you think you're doing. Maybe psychologically you're trying to teach them a lesson, so be it. Physiologically, you're teaching them nothing. Make sure you understand that. It's a big difference, right? VO2 max needs to return down to that recovery level, which is 40-50% VO2 max, which equates to that sub 60% perfect world, sub 60% of max heart rate prior to finishing a cool down. Percent max force output, it's got to be so light it has to be aerobic. It has to be a level of exertion that you can perform for at least 2-3 minutes plus at a level where you're not tired. Whatever that pace is, a super slow jog, a fast walk, super light load if we're lifting weights or moving the body with bands or using cables, whatever it is you're using as an apparatus for doing your training strength-wise, let alone conditioning-wise. Make sure it's a low level of force output, no more than, by the time you're finishing, 40% or so of your max force output. Okay. Static stretching can be used anytime. Anytime. Simply understand that you have to be, whatever you're stretching, you got to know exactly what the muscle does, so you do the exact opposite what the muscle's supposed to do. If you're talking about an extensor of your shoulder, you better be going into flexion. If it also happens to be an internal rotator, you better be going into external rotation of the shoulder. You got to know exactly what its function is supposed to be. Get to that point of first muscular contraction by gradually moving into it, holding it for 20-30 seconds, so we allow, once again, that Golgi tendon organ to slowly override the muscle spindle. Okay? In dynamic type actions, which can be also done at any time, I should mention again, the only thing you don't want to do is, after statically stretching, expect the muscles you are currently statically stretching to fire efficiently right now. They're not going to yet. They can in a few minutes. And as long as you don't hold stretches for 45, 60 seconds or longer at extreme tensions, you're not going to overly fatigue your athletes. You're not going to see a dramatic drop in performance like some research seems to say. You got to look at what it's saying. If you hold it for too long and push too hard with static stretching, you might see that. Ordinarily, though, you won't, as long as it's only 20, 30 seconds, repeated only a few times, and at very, very light intensities, right? Dynamic exercises, or actual motion, moving through a controlled range of motion both directions in a given particular motion, is ideal from a standpoint of course, mobility and mobilization and motor control. Very, very important, whether you do it before, whether you do it and not static, or you do it in addition to static, which is really, I think, the ideal if you have the time to do it. That's really what it comes down to. Do you have time for static and dynamic? If you do it. If not, go right to dynamic and make sure you're doing it very gradually increasing the level of intensity with your dynamic activities. That said, when you move one way, when you flex the elbow, your extensors, your triceps, must relax. It's called reciprocal inhibition. Unlike static stretching, which is autogenic inhibition, whereby you hold in place for 20-30 seconds, allow the GTO to slowly override the muscle spindles. That's autogenic inhibition. Reciprocal inhibition is when you move one way or activate an agonist, the antagonist, the opposing musculature, must relax, or you don't get motion in that direction. It has to happen that way. And by doing that, you get a stretch to some degree of the muscles that are being released. Each time you move in one way, getting some to activate, the other ones must release. So by moving through full ranges of motion in every direction you can think of, so to speak, theoretically, you get the benefit of activity as well as flexibility if you do it well. And that said, water versus carb drink, make sure you should know this by now. Generally speaking, there's no exact numbers on this. You see some variation what the textbook says and some of the sources you'll see. But you're looking at water probably as early as every 10 minutes during activity, and certainly not more than every 20 minutes, not less than every 20 minutes during activities in general. Okay, if your practice is going for 15, 20 minutes plus, Well, they better be making sure you're drinking within 10, 15, 20 minutes at the very, very most from the point where you started to this moment in time, drinking some water again. You'll see as low as about 4 or 5 ounces during that time and as high as 6 to 8 ounces during that time. Actually, some will say as high as 10 ounces. So really talking about the athletes, the temperature, the intensity, a lot of variations, right? You want to experiment with that a little bit, but you definitely don't want to be shortcutting your athletes on water. If it's carb drink, it becomes carb drink when they start engaging in activity. It's an hour or more. When you know it's going to be at least an hour, if not more, you might want to be thinking about having a carb drink like Gatorade or something like it. And don't shy away from Gatorade just because you hear some people saying something negative about Gatorade or there's too much sugar in there. If you're engaging in high-level activity for an hour or more, I got to tell you flat out, there's no way on earth that sucrose versus some other form of sugar is going to have any effect on you that's even noticeable at all. If someone's trying to be world-class, we can probably get into that kind of thing. Difference of a second or a half second or a quarter of a second or a tenth of a second, whereby it might make a big deal to you in the long-term performance. We can talk about the nth degree of that kind of stuff. But for the most part, most people, it's not going to make any difference at all, if at all, even in the situations we just mentioned. That said, find whatever carb drink you find that works well with people. Don't water it down. We're talking about 6 to 8 ounces of carb solution drink, 6 to 8% carb solution, which is what Gatorade is. That's why we suggest it. And that's every 15 to 20 minutes during activity of an hour or more. Okay, and you can experiment with that and do it more often if need be. Extreme heat or an athlete that's clearly burning off more than other people are metabolically, you can vary it as to increasing that, but that's a pretty good number generally speaking. Best reduction for acidosis. The best way to reduce the excess hydrogen ion concentration increase that's happening as you move more and more toward the lactate threshold, toward fatigue of the muscle during activities that are lasting 45 seconds or longer, or somewhere in that range. If you're doing much, much shorter than that, you're not going to see that same level of acidosis, but you're going to see some. It will still happen, just not to the same levels. That said, what you need to do is decrease the duration of your work period. If you're seeing that happen significantly, you need to make sure the intensity, percent max heart rate, drops. RPE, they should be telling you RPE should be getting lesser. If they tell you the RPE is a 4, but their percent max heart rate's like 80%, I don't care what they said about 4. They have no understanding of what's going on with their body's actual responses, despite their perception of those responses. They're not reliable. I find this happens a lot in deconditioned people. They'll give you an RPE of, I feel pretty good. It's about a level 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. You take their heart and they're at 75, 80% max heart rate. They have no idea what moderate to high intensity feels like, which means they're not ready for it. Whereas an athlete who's really ready for it, who does it on a regular basis, can tell you flat out, I don't feel so good. I feel like my heart rate's up quite a bit, and it will be. Or they'll tell you, I feel pretty good. Heart's probably about 130, 140, somewhere in there, and that's 135 or 134. They know it. When the athlete knows where they are, they're better and much more capable of being able to be pushed at higher levels because they will be able to tell you when their body is not ready for it. Okay, not the ones who lie to themselves or don't understand how the body response actually works. VO2 max. Once that VO2 max gets 50-60% of VO2 max, which is about 70+% max heart rate, you'll start to see that acidosis increase more and more and more excess hydrogen ion concentration in the muscles being used during exertion. And that's, of course, what we want to see reduce by either lowering the intensity if necessary, if they're not meeting performance standards, or increasing the rest period. And make sure you understand those are your best 2 parameters that I keep hammering into you for your ability to program to actually reduce acidosis are changing the work and rest periods, let alone the intensity of the expectation of performance at this moment in time. Yes, proper hydration. Yes, proper nutrients. Proper sleep after they leave you. Lowering life stress. Working with them on what's going on outside practice and your event and whatnot in your sport. But always, always, your primary thing to look at: work, rest, intensity. How do I change these things? How do I adjust these things to figure out what's the best way of making sure my athletes are conditioned? I'm not talking about skill level. The skill level, this is totally irrespective of skill level. Skill's got to be there. If they don't have the skill level, the coordination, the motor control, this stuff is kind of moot, right? But once you get ready for conditioning, then you need to make sure they're ready for it on a given day. Okay. Now going on to week 7, overload, not overkill. When people talk about overload, they seem to think it means whatever's the heaviest weight you can lift, whatever's the fastest speed you can possibly run. No, if you've not been going more than 60% intensity for the last 5 months, 6 months, 10 years, then don't go more than 61%, so to speak, today. You're trying to go just a little beyond what they're currently used to. overloading beyond a little bit more than what they currently have been doing, not try to get everything today. Happens all the time in sport. You see it all the time, those athletes that are pushed in the first few weeks of getting back to practice regularly and getting ready for the season, and coaches beat the living heck out of them with the expectation somehow that's good for them, without any background understanding of physiology. I used to love to be, as a competitive coach back when I was coaching year-round with basketball, track, and cross-country, I loved seeing those athletes that were doing really well at the beginning of the season for the other teams and seeing our kids not do well. And I'd tell those kids, don't worry. I can tell right now they're going to be overworked. And then about 12 weeks, when we come back to conference championships or the playoffs and basketball and whatnot, conditioning will not be a problem. Skill-wise, we can't do anything about that if that person's just genetically more gifted than someone else is. But as far as conditioning, dramatic changes for sure over the course of 12 weeks. Reversibility, within 2 weeks to 3 weeks, you will start to lose the gains of hypertrophy and cardiovascular gains. Remember, cardiovascular gains are predominantly coming through stroke volume changes. Specifically, stroke volume will be the first thing that's lost about within 2 to 3 weeks of losing activity. And we want to make sure that we don't go more than 2 weeks from activity to avoid reversibility of our gains from a standpoint of hypertrophy, great muscle gain, as well as cardiovascular conditioning, okay, generally speaking. When we get to 3 months, we can lose as much as, half, not half, but close to half of what we've gained. And that's not good, as much as little as 3 months. So don't fall that far off, or it's a hard to get it back. Now, when we talk about specificity, picking the right exercises and to meet the goal, we have to know what muscles specifically we're working. Yeah, I'll get into our anatomy. Okay, we have to know specifically what our primary muscles are, what their job is. We're not talking about every single hip flexor, certainly, but your hip flexors in general, you got to know they're working, or every single hip extensor, but not which ones, but at least know they're working, okay, or should be. Fiber type, we work in type 1, which means we're working mostly endurance type activity. Type 2A, okay, type glycolytic type activity for that somewhere in that 20 seconds to about 2 or 3 minutes time frame, 10 seconds to 2 or 3 minutes. Are we talking about type 2B, type 2X muscle fibers for power exertion level? And of course, speed is a type 2X muscle fibers, or more towards endurance is type 1 for longer duration, and more interval type work is more type 2A, and same, once again, that 10, 20 seconds-ish to about 2 or 3 minutes time frame. Ideally for intervals, remember it's 20, 60 seconds for intervals with somewhere between 30 to 90 seconds rest, okay? VO2 max improvement, you want to see aerobic capacity improve, they need to be exerting for 20, 60 minutes at around their VO2 max by the end of the session, starting somewhere around 50% VO2 max and building up toward that VO2 max level at least 3 days a week. We don't see significant changes in VO2 max. For a deconditioned person, it can be up to 50% improvement in several weeks or a few months. It could be as little as 2 to 3% for our high-level athletes that are already high-level. But 2 or 3% in a high-level athlete, excuse me, could be outrageously important for elite athlete, right? And again, our sprinters, not worried about VO2 max, our explosive athletes. But yes, our football players and our volleyball players, don't think of them just explosive athletes. It's way too much is put upon them as explosive athletes only. It's just not true. Because sprinters don't go for a few seconds, rest for 30 seconds, and go again 20, 30, 50, 80 times in a row. Whereas a football player or volleyball player might, right? It's not the same thing. Be careful referring to football players and volleyball players and similar type of athletes as explosive athletes. Oh, they are. They need to be, but they also need to have glycolytic and aerobic capacity capabilities, unlike a pure sprinter, which doesn't need that stuff, okay? Hypertrophy gains, muscle fiber growth, it's going to be at least 6 weeks into your program before you see any gain from strength, muscle force production from the hypertrophy itself. And of course, you can lose it starting in 2 or 3 weeks. Luckily, unlike cardiovascular conditioning, you can gain back your hypertrophy faster than you can gain back your cardiovascular conditioning. Interesting, right? VO2 max testing, once again, you want to find go about 10-minute warm-up, and then you have about 10 to 12 minutes. We're talking about what your pace is you can handle for 10 to 12 minutes. Various forms of testing we can engage with this. We can do incremental type testing, we can do steady state type testing. I think it's very valuable for steady state type testing in general for us, for athletes, not necessarily have to do some incremental testing, although you can find one that's valuable, you think, for your athletes, okay? And of course, test them at least every 12 weeks or so, as little as maybe every 4 weeks, all depending, okay? Technique matters greatly. If you don't have motor skill, motor control, coordination, it's really not going to matter. But of course, form, standpoint of what test you use, make sure it's applicable to your athletes. If they're runners, if they're running in football, they got to do a test that actually has them run, not a cycling test or a swimming test. We're talking about a swimmer, they need to be doing a test in the pool, right? Cyclist needs to be doing it on the bike. That's crucial because the activity of motor control as it relates to the sport and understanding their capacity for handling load or intensity in that specific motion is crucial to have any benefit for VO2 max improvements, okay? Age and gender differences. Once you start getting above 55 years of age, you can see up to half of the performance that's lost being due to just age, and about half being, up to half, being more to just performance changes from the standpoint of you haven't been doing the same activities. So we can really stem a lot of the tide of performance lost if we keep engaging in the same activities and don't lighten up on them from a standpoint of regularity. Intensity, work periods, rest periods have to be changed according to the athlete, not just according to some norm. We have the absolute science available to us. I just shake my head all the time when I see people talking about random work periods and rest periods. Like, where are you making this stuff up from? You have to understand physiology. Once you get the physiology down, it's really just a matter of paying attention to your athletes and knowing what you want from them to know if they're really meeting the goals you need them to be meeting. Okay. Gender differences, of course, women, generally speaking, have a lot less testosterone than men. Not always. Some women have higher testosterone levels, right? But that said, for that reason, men often have much higher max force production, much higher speed, explosiveness than women. Not always true, but certainly, excuse me, does happen as the case because of testosterone differences between men and women. Now, final thoughts, the end of week 7 here as we go into our final 4 weeks. Make sure you look at those sample posts. Make sure that you look at those past videos, every weekly video. Hopefully you've gone through this video in detail. I can always tell on your sample posts or discussion board posts, that you've not done it, because just watching a 30-minute video can change everything for a standpoint of how much easier it is to write a good post each week and not spend an extra hour plus or lose an extra 20, 30 points every single week. And more importantly, and I've said it a million times before, not losing the benefits you're going to gain by being able to help your athletes more. That's what we're all about. We need to all be about, right? You have one other week, one more week away. It's actually 2 weeks from probably the time you see this. You only have it be due. Second exam. Before you get second exam, I'm going to give you more feedback on exam 1. I was waiting on a lot of people who had not finished exam 1. That's why I was not giving you back your responses as fast as I might like and you might like. Signature assignment, your paper you just completed, which you should now have a grade for, is your signature assignment, which you'll need to be making as part of your master's portfolio. So make sure you add in or edit anything that I give you feedback on that's going to be in your portfolio. Make sure you do double check for spelling errors. I didn't correct every spelling error. I'm not going to, but you need to make sure that stuff is clarified there. Keep reading over it again before you put it into your portfolio for your master's degree. Okay. And that said, finally, keep up the efforts. I know it can be tough balancing life and balancing class, particularly over the holidays. It's really difficult. I know. I appreciate your efforts. You still have to give high effort, do the best that you can. That's all that we've got. Sometimes it isn't what we want it to be, but you just have to try and do the best you can. And let me know if I can be of help to you. We'll talk to you again soon.